Virginia had Everett with Leonard, and then she did her whole fall through space thing, go to a different time, bleed out on the floor of the Washington Monument forever. That's a really weird sentence out of context. Oh boy, this is a bad idea. I hope that you all can appreciate real art when you see it. In another interview from 1954, we can see that several of the immigrants who arrived on Ellis Island says that there was a very foul odor, as well as things like the smell of flesh and dead birds everywhere. In our second video titled TFMD Leaves Mars, we can see the previous figure of the Sphinx floating off into space. Now it's the Sarlacc pit. People are literally trying to like crawl out the sides and keep slipping back into the mouth. And we're then introduced to the most important character in the entire story, Mr. Squirrel. He's important and I love him. And of course the theory that they were murdered by the Yeti, which for some reason seems more plausible than the military one, because if it was me, I would feel more obligated to sign an NDA from a Yeti than I would the government. Has it been past a minute? It's probably been past a minute. The CIA killed John F. Kennedy. But I guess we'll just never know, and there's no use speculating it. So, time for the jokes. He also played bongos at the end of his address, which I felt was important to add. In 1949, the Statue of Liberty went through its renovations, and that's when they started feeding people to it on the reg. The official telling of events goes something like this. Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots. The first one was use the Patreon money to get better markers. So how about before I make your life worse by filling your head with more depressing knowledge, let's talk about something not depressing. Like galaxy lamps. And also they can't move, they're just stuck in a suit talking to each other. So that's, you know, pretty sad. And that's not a euphemism or like an analogy at all. Like Lucifer came from hell and then put on a James Dean mask, and that's what James Dean is. So if you're going into the pit, you better be strapped. Everett Arnoldson, commonly referred to as the 20th Washington absentee, is a humanoid creature that is purported to inhabit the forest of the Washington Zone. Have you ever seen Everett? What? And just to prove how suave and macho he is, the day he won, he just went and raced race cars with Richard Nixon. Let's say our fictional Sam Hyde really doesn't like NASA at all. They hate space. The thought process is so funny to me because it's like, yeah, we want to, you know, pay this contractor to make us a statue. And then whenever it shows up, it's just a woman. And they're like, oh, well, it was a statue, but it killed like hundreds of sailors in Europe and put their skin on, and that's why it's a woman now. And the government's like, oh, but we can still get the statue out of there, right? Also, everyone wants to say in like all the theories I looked at that William killed a bunch of kids down here, I guess because he was in like a silly, goofy mood. While making his escape out of the bookstore, John F. Kennedy ran into a police officer. He then pulled a revolver and shot the police officer twice, killing him. Which, I mean, after you shot the president, you might as well add the cherry to it, I guess. Got really dark. Let's do another meme. When the aux cord too hot. In the Five Nights at Freddy's survival logbook, yes, that's a real phrase I just said out loud. Whereas the other one went to 2003 and did the whole DC Monument torture thing, whatever. And I can't help but imagine there was a moment in time where Gavrilo was walking out of the shop with like a Subway sandwich in his hand and a gun in the other. And then the Archduke pulls up and parks directly in front of him. And there had to be a moment of time where he decided between a sandwich and starting the largest war of humanity's history, and he chose violence. Also, in 1966, they tried to reevaluate JFK's autopsy, and his brain was missing. Like, after the initial autopsy, they took the brain out and preserved it, and no one's been able to find it since. So I make it that what you will. I have no idea why they would do that. So in other words, it's pretty big. Here I get more of the vibe we're all a massive flesh conglomerate leading to one like dystopian hellscape. That sounds much more like William was doing some shady stuff and accidentally killed his own daughter and got kicked out. Not he murdered 5 kids like last week. About the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And with over 500 playable characters, it's all the fun of World War I without the dying part. Then at the end, there's a quote from John Rockefeller Jr., who says that his father thinks the tree disappeared, and that's not true because Rockefeller Jr. says that he's seen the tree walking in the plaza and that it resembles a man far more than any tree. Using audiograph equipment, and this is my interpretation of that, the procedure for treatment involved removing the brain and as much of the spinal cord as possible from the amalgamation. When possible, extraction of other organs such as eyes, cochlear tissue, tongues, and larynx would later enable the recovered patient a sensory experience much closer to that which they had previously enjoyed, since medical technology is even still unable to replicate the organic sensory quality of human sensory tissues. However, the difficulty and cost of this additional procedure all but ensured that this rarely took place. Or essentially, baby powder is an interdimensional picket fence. So in the meanwhile, the Archduke's vehicle continues on to the courthouse where he was supposed to go and give a sort of speech, but now he's rather upset because someone threw a grenade at him. And I'll explain all of that later, but I'm not kidding. Like, George Washington doesn't come back, at least not yet in the series. But he's there, whatever that means. Hey everyone, today we are talking about the funniest thing in the world, people dying. So last time, I'll go through the restaurants, at least for now. We had Fredbear's Family Diner, which is the one where Evan got his head chopped and then that shut down. We had Fredbear and Friends, which is the one where Charlie was murdered outside of, and that got shut down. We then had Freddy Fazbear's Pizza open, which is where 5 children were murdered, and one security guard had the front part of his brain taken out, and that was shut down. And now finally, we have Freddy Fazbear's Pizza reopening, and Michael working as the security guard. The CIA obviously didn't like that, and for those who know anything about them, they have a tendency to start to follow their own directive when president or state's heads don't agree with it. I mean, for evidence, just look at like the 60s drug crisis or sending guns to South America, but we won't talk about that. And now why is she the giant floating meatball thing? Not only that, but whenever the Archduke went to give his speech, he didn't have it on him because the speech was in the vehicle that was blown up. So someone had to go retrieve the speech from the destroyed car, which was covered in blood, and hand the bloodied piece of paper to the Archduke while he was at the podium. Also, during the image where it's showing him before he gives his entire talk that starts the Department of Technology, why is there a faceless man standing behind him? What? That doesn't connect to anything. I hate it. He's the devil, and the guy behind him is Judas? So he began to modify the aforementioned Funtime animatronics with the express purpose of trapping another child so that he could figure out how the whole soul possession works. So a group of clowns were performing above the flesh pit itself because people are going to be stupid, and then 50 of them fell into the pit, couldn't be located for hours, and when they did locate them, they were trapped inside of a digestive like enzyme sac, like a giant lysosome. And then when they cut them out, they were all melted together and screaming and shrieking, and then froze like that. And they just left it there. And also, I feel like as a scientist, Santiago should know that the chances of romance are incredibly decreased in an experiment whenever every time 2 people may be developing some form of a bond, there's a 50-year-old man at the back of the boat like, and yeah, Dean, don't like him in this universe. Real James Dean, probably a swell guy, real sad that he died in that car crash, but I hate President Dean. Yeah. Now you may be asking what happened to our Sam Hyde. Well, considering that reports are now that they found bits of human remains around, like specifically the RV itself, I think it's pretty safe to say that it was a one-way trip. All right, I know that was a lot, but you're being very brave and I'm proud of you. What could Archduke Ferdinand have been doing that would have saved him from dying and therefore prevented World War I and II? That's right, the thing you knew was coming whenever I started doing ads is here now to save the day. Raid Shadow Legends! I don't know what to draw Ferdinand as. I guess he'll be a triangle. So, because like, you know, Illuminati. Like everyone's just talking or whatever, and he's sitting back there like, any moment now, they're gonna rip out each other's throat. To which, when President Dean was asked why he did it, Dean said, the rocks won't shoot her down. So in other words, a small school bus that eats people.
Oh my gosh.
So this assassination was both on, and maybe off again. Well, we'll talk about that right after I talk about this. And you may be wondering, what's this? Well, if you'll turn your face about 5 degrees in that direction, then in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, some random guy showed up for one night to fight for his life against animatronics and then never showed up again. There was a guy working at the CIA whose name rhymes with Gorge Mush. Gorge Mush, that's what we'll call him. Ideally, the rig cuts as it goes, leaving a burnt, cauterized path through the meat, while also crushing and processing any minerals it runs through. In the real world, the pit isn't uniform, and you end up running into all kinds of obstacles requiring interventional solutions, or the brass up top decide that they don't want you just cutting through certain parts of the anatomy. So you suit up and get out ahead of the rig to poke and prod and pry at a walking pace. 8 hours a day for weeks at a time. Rigs have a big hydraulic arms that reach forward and push, lift, and splay open organs or muscle bundles before us roustabouts would go in and suck up or hose out any blood, cut tendons, cauterized tissue, rinse, and repeat. And you may be asking, well, how did people do things like go to the bathroom? That's what the poop cage was for. So the idea is that the military wipes out an entire group of hikers and the leader, and then sees the one girl who survived and is like, hey, sign this legal contract. But Dean is evil.
I hate him.
Entered, effectively wearing Michael as a skin suit. After taking him to the hospital, the men realize that the frozen guy that they had sitting in their bathtub was George Washington. Like the George Washington, the one and only. Enjoy legendary trout fishing, geotonic carnal moans, broken philosophy, backcountry hiking, and camping. I love the broken philosophy because, yeah, where's your God now? Number 1 being James Dean, who, yes, I fully believe is evil. I should also mention, before anyone decides that I am a threat for this, this is a joke. It's all a joke. This is post-irony humor. This is entirely educational. I believe none of it, and you should believe none of it, and everything is a joke. So, tomato, potato. It's my channel, I can do what I want. I think we're due for another meme, so here's one. Haha. Yes, funny yellow dog. Make sad head voice quiet. So the special tree made a tune that, quote, breaks his lung. In it, we can see a sphinx in the distance moving on the planet Mars. The internet is telling me that a group of sharks is called a shiver. That's fantastic, okay. Video shows that the ship was walking on giant legs. Reed himself was charged with peeling the skin off of the statue. And I'm gonna continue using Park, but, you know, by Park I mean giant flesh underground monster thing. We still don't have any idea yet in the series what in the Grand Canyon is so important, but it's apparently enough that you can give like these ancient Egyptian soldier dudes these giant swords to cut off people and make them into like Lovecraftian monsters, and that's totally justified. We then see a design for an anti-airship death ray. Now, let's say, again as a joke, that AT&T had close ties to a certain organization that works for the Fed. Let's just make up a random NASA. So there's an electric man that has the power to melt bunker doors and turn people to ash running around. I also want to remind you, this is the same series where a living statue that skins people and George Washington are also running around, and James Dean's the president. I was trying to draw him on a hill, but it looks like he's got really big legs. We're going to keep it. However, the idea of a, what, 30, 40 foot giant iron lady with the sword and shield running you down so she can skin you to make a human out of herself is like top 10 worst things ever. Meanwhile, Santiago's journal entry for this occasion is like, I watched Jose sprint to the back and come back with an axe. And then I watched with the primality of man as he took off the head of the shark. And then everyone put their nasty hands in and pulled out pieces, when in reality they were just eating a fish. In it, we can see people being led inside of the monument itself, hoisted up into the air as sound waves seem to render them unconscious or kill them entirely before the floor drops out of the bucket they're in and they fall to the ground before someone else comes in to repeat the process. Fallen Father opens with the return of the most important character in the entire series. That's right, Mr. Squirrel. A lot of people also point to Jack Ruby, the man who ran up and shot Lee Harvey Oswald, as being for the mob because his family debts were paid off. But you know who else would probably pay off family debts? I'll give you a hint, it starts with CIA. We then see video numbers 3 and 4, which says TFMD enters atmosphere. Again, we can see the Sphinx entering the atmosphere. And that's it. That's the whole episode. It's just like George Washington's alive, and it just drops that in your lap. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now, that doesn't really go anywhere. Just George Washington is an active character in this story, and
Don't you forget it.
it's not understood how much of her brain capacity transfers from human to meatball crown thing. I like Dr. Disturbing. He's my favorite. He feels like he would choose some edgy name online like Wendigoon and make videos about conspiracy theories. I like him. Those were funny jokes. Haha. Look at this funny joke. Yellow dog again. Oh, you yellow dog. I'm so glad we got to joke together. It was so much fun. Thank you for being a part of these jokes. Thank you to my patrons who participate in jokes. I'm not going to read your name this time because you're welcome. Link in bio, because what's monetization? I won't have that. So thank you for making jokes with me. I'm going to leave these on forever and wait for someone to come to my door. So I will see you all in the next one. Hopefully, probably, please. But I will see you all in the next one. And as always, thank you for watching. Bye.